First and foremost, I don't pick on any particular nation, right?
Neal, let me ask you this question because there seems to be so many attacks happening today. Are we in a cyber war?
Yes. The easiest answer to that is yes. I think we have always been in a cyber war. I think the players in that cyber war have changed over the years, and I think 10 years ago it'd have been easy to say, "Hey, I'm Target. I don't need to worry about Russia," right? Because I just care about PCI and whatnot. I think now, and I think Solar Winds has proven this. I think the water treatment facility plant hack that happened in Florida is starting to prove some of this. I think we're closer and closer to blurring those lines between, if you're Target, do you have to worry about Russia not just from a commodity cybercrime perspective, but do you need to worry about them as a nation state perspective? And I think that those lines are starting to get really blurred. And I lean on Solar Winds for this, right? Um, when we talk about state sponsored hackers, first and foremost, I don't pick on any particular nation, right? Oftentimes Russia and China are the names that come out of everybody's mouth because that's what they're used to hearing and talking about. But one of the first things that I like to break down for people, right, is every nation out there, almost every nation out there, has some form of a cyber capability. France, England, India, Pakistan, Malaysia, the Philippines, they have cyber capabilities. When we were in the government, we tracked all of these nation states cyber activities because you know, you know, it's just like monitoring troop movements across the globe. You want to know what they're doing from a cyber threat, from a cyber warfare perspective, so that you know whether they're making cyber moves against you. And so when we talk about state-sponsored attackers, their goals, their motivations are to further their national security objectives given by their government. And so if hacking Target, right, furthers their national security objective, then yes, Target is a target for, well, I used a double pun on that one.
That's okay.
For a nation state attack. And I don't think currently organizations like Target are thinking about themselves as like, what is my value to the national strategic objectives of the Philippines? I'll give you an example. I'll give you one example real quick, and then I want to turn it over to you and see what your thoughts are on this. Um, um, China, and again, not to pick on China, but just because this is a very relevant case, right? We know that China does a lot from an intellectual property theft perspective, but people oftentimes only focus on China stealing the intellectual property of military apparatuses so that they can make their own F-35 or something like that. Believe it or not, China targets a lot of our consumer goods. I worked for a company, a few years back that produced one of the biggest brands of baby milk in the world. And they were a target of Chinese state-sponsored activity so that China could steal the formulas for this baby milk so that they could produce it cheaper in their own country instead of having to buy from this corporation. So first off, coming from military agency background, I do want to tell a small story on intelligence. In the military, when you start to learn about just intelligence generally as an apparatus, it's important to remember that intelligence is about getting information to decision makers so they can make decisions rapidly. And I explained a concept on my stream last week when we were talking about the Florida water treatment facility plant hack, which we can do that if you want to talk about that.
Oh yeah.
And it's something that I've brought to a lot of companies since I've been out of the military, because when we think about cyber, right? I don't think people realize how much of being in a cyber war we have been over the last 15 years, and how it went from being kind of a, well, cyber war is a military thing. The governments are dealing with that. We don't have to deal with it in a corporate world. But when you look at solar winds, when you look at what just happened down in Florida with the water treatment facility plant, when you look at how cyber has evolved over the last 10 years, those lines really start to blur on whether a private company like Apple or Target or something like that is engaged in cyber war. 10 years ago, it had been like, no, they're not engaged in cyber war. The only thing that they have to be concerned about is PCI. But now that you've got something like solar winds happening, where nation states are targeting private companies more and more frequently, more and more brazenly, um, I think every public company needs to be worried about whether they're a target of actual offensive cyber aggression from a different nation state. And so bringing wartime concepts into the cybersecurity organization is key. And I've always tried to build cybersecurity organizations that, you'll carry over some of the military stuff that we used to do in the military. And so one of the first concepts that I like to teach to cybersecurity organizations is, or even just the business side of the organization is a concept known as OODA, OODA. It's a military concept that was actually originated by a Korean War fighter pilot during the Korean War, which stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. So OODA. And what it's about doing is it's a circular loop, decision loop, right? You want to observe your bad guy, you want to observe the adversary, you want to orient yourself to their current location, you want to quickly make a decision, and you want to act even faster, right? So imagine you're sitting on a blue team, you're looking at a console, and you see an alert pop up. That OODA loop needs to instantly kick in, and you need to observe that indicator, orient yourself to decide if that is a threat or not. And if it is a threat, you need to rapidly make a decision and rapidly be able to act on it. And so to be able to do all of that, to be able to do that OODA loop, you have to have good intelligence. And so that's why when you talk about OSINT is a form of intelligence, but when we think about threat intelligence as a whole inside of most cybersecurity organizations, that's why I like this one right here, which is the Threat Intelligence Handbook, which helps moving toward a security intelligence program. There's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to building a cyber threat intelligence program inside of most organizations. Most organizations think that they can go buy like a Threat Connect or a Recorded Future or something like that, and that's it. They're good. They solved all their threat intelligence problems. But there's way more to cyber threat intelligence than I think people realize. And this is a great book to kind of give you a real good primer on cyber threat intelligence in most organizations.
Just remind us, Neal, because we have covered this before, but just in case people haven't heard it before, what's the relation between red and blue team? Because people often focus on the blue team, and I think we need to actually, shed some proper light on why, for instance, blue team is better than red team, etc.
Exactly, and I don't want to, and let's make sure we quantify the definition of the term better, right? In a war, you've got offense and defense, right? And everybody gets so focused on offense, and when you think about wartime and you think about offense, you think about special ops folks, right? You think about Navy SEALs, right? Or you think about your SAS, types of folks who jump in behind enemy lines and they creep through the bushes, over the course of 4 days to do a sniper mission to kill the bad guy and the war is over. And that's what oftentimes people think about when they think about red team is that cool type of militaristic, imagery. When in fact, the war, when you look at the wars that have happened over the years, World War I, World War II, whatever the case is, they're won primarily by foot soldiers on the ground, people who are fighting the day-to-day war, on a regular basis. And this is what I equate blue team to: is blue team is your foot soldiers on the ground who are working on behest of a company to protect that company on a day in and a day out perspective. This is why there is more of a need for blue team roles than there are for red team roles.
Yeah, I think I used the wrong word there. I think we said last time it was 10-1. Is that right?
It is 10-1. Yeah. On average, it's about 10-1. When you look at most security organizations in the Fortune 100 space, their red teams are considerably small compared to their blue teams. As a matter of fact, a lot of the Fortune 100 to 500, you have less than one or two people in their org that are solely dedicated to doing red team or offensive type work. But even the use of the word offensive in red teams in Fortune 100 companies is a misnomer, right? Because it's not offensive hacking in a Fortune 100 company. You're still doing cyber defense in a Fortune 100 company because, Target is not going to run out there and hack, Home Depot or any of its other competitors. When you think about offensive hacking in the Fortune 100 space is not, a forward leaning hacking role where you're out there hacking your competitors. You're still, and this is why I tell people that hacking in a company, red team operations, is such a small piece of the overall cyber defense strategy, because you're only out there doing such a small piece of that ethical hacking role, while the rest of the blue team, the rest of the governance organization, the rest of the other tiers that exist inside of a cybersecurity organization, they're actually defending the whole company. And so from a blue team perspective, blue team is your front soldiers. They're your foot soldiers. They're the front of the lines. They're the ones who are out there that are every day providing daily protection for billion-dollar brands out there, and that's why there's more need for that.
Yeah, I mean, the focus I wanted to point to here is if someone's trying to get into cybersecurity, there seems to be a lot more opportunity to join the blue team just because there's more jobs. So if, let's say, your goal, and we've mentioned this before, is to eventually be on the red team, it makes sense to join the blue team just because cybersecurity is becoming more and more important. You've said we're in a cyber war. Companies need to be protected. More and more companies need to be protected. So the amount of jobs is greater. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and that is a true statement. One of the things that I think you hit the nail on the head, right? When you talk about getting into a cybersecurity organization, the least path of resistance is kind of a twofold, right? The first is that security analyst role that sits on that blue team, right? That's, and I don't want to downplay that SOC analyst role, but that is quickly becoming that, hey, you just got out of college, or you're just out of high school and you've got some certifications, right? Or you got some hands-on stuff. You're trying to get your foot in the door. That SOC analyst level 1 job, that should be the easiest job for you to get in a cybersecurity organization, because you literally are just watching for alerts on a glass screen, and using pre-built playbooks and using pre-built incident response plans to triage those and then get them over to people who are gonna take them to the next level. And so yeah, that's the easiest way I see to get into a cybersecurity organization. But the second thing about that, though, right, is I think that every red teamer, or even every aspiring red team or ethical hacker, must know blue team concepts. And I think every blue teamer must know red team concepts. I send my blue teamers, I send them to, offensive hacking, certifications and, courseware work and things like that, because that is just as important to them on the blue teamer side as it is to them on the red teamer side. So, I'm a believer that certifications, going to get your CEH or OSCP or EJPT or whatever the case is, doesn't pigeonhole you into red teaming. As a matter of fact, I know excellent blue teamers that have pursued a lot of red team certifications for the purpose of making themselves better blue teamers.